we're continuing to stay on the theme of transformation. Again, different industry, but our next speaker, Abdullah Al-Shaksy, is a co-founder and COO of a venture firm, Phaze Ventures, and he's going to talk about Oman and investing in the future of energy and logistics, which is also, like, again, two things that need to be massively transformed and that he's working on. He has an impressive background for 8 years experiencing and managing both public and private equity funds. So he's been working in the industry quite a long time. But of course, it's a very significant step to set up his own fund and like work on transforming this industry. So hopefully he can share and add a lot of the perspectives to other things which we've heard, to things that like Peter has talked about. So I want to welcome him very warmly and give him a big round of applause while he's getting ready on stage. So thank you very much for coming all the way here to us. Please join us. And I'm sure everybody's going to look very much forward to hear how they can get your money, hopefully. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for the kind introductions. Cool, so I wanted to talk to you guys today about a major transformation that's happening in the world and in the global economy. This shift is being accelerated by a couple of really important trends. First of all is the imperative to switch to cleaner and more sustainable sources of energy, and also the electrification of mobility. And second is the emergence of new technologies that are infiltrating industry for the first time. And this key trend that I'm going to be talking to you about today is the transformation and the disruption that's happening in the field of energy and logistics. So this is the global demand for energy over the last 100 years or so. As you can see, that's an exponential trend, a trend that all of us techies really like, but for environmentalists and for energy producers around the world, this is very concerning. But luckily, the investments that we're making today, hopefully, that have been accelerating over the last few years, will help us address these key issues. Now, to go back to that slide, a couple of things that you'll notice is not only is the demand for energy shifting rapidly, but the sources of these energies are also shifting. With the emergence of renewable and the viability of solar and wind today being more economically viable than even coal in the heartland of coal in US and China. So I'm going to be talking a lot today about the VC side of things, but obviously there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on the infrastructure side of things. So as mentioned in the intro, I'm Abdullah Al-Shaksy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Phaze Ventures. We were founded to, well, our mission is to enable innovation and enable the next generation of innovators. A little bit of background about myself and my co-founders and our extended team, but maybe you can just look this up on the website. So where we're positioned is we look primarily at seed and Series A investments. We work closely with accelerators from around the world and internal incubators of various energy corporates, as well as research institutes. And we believe that positions us very strategically in the path to the larger players, which are the corporate venture arms of all of the major energy companies. So to talk a little bit about our region, the Middle East, venture capital is still quite a young ecosystem in the region, but it's growing rapidly. I'm sure all of you heard this year about the Uber deal. It's not on the 2019, I was missing that out, but of course, Uber acquired Careem most recently. Also Amazon acquiring Souq were two major deals that came out of the region and are really starting to accelerate and get people excited about the startup ecosystem. More specifically in Oman, the ecosystem is developing quite rapidly with lots of different players filling in various different roles, from funding to incubation to acceleration, research, commercialization, and both public and private sector participating in this, though it's still early days. This is where we're headquartered, but we also have partners in London and in Singapore, and we look globally. So before I jump into the startup space, I wanted to talk a little bit about the corporate landscape in Oman. We have an interesting setup in our country. We have a highly integrated energy space. And you might be wondering, why do I keep slipping in logistics in there? Well, I think those two things go hand in hand, especially with the disruptions that are happening today with the electrification of mobility. So in Oman, we have two main energy players. One is our upstream, as they call it, and then down and midstream, an electric production company. So Petroleum Development Oman and Oman Oil are the two key players. And what's interesting about this setup is basically these two players are responsible for about 80% of our oil and gas exploration, production, refining, and export. And that's around almost 1 million barrels per day in Oman. The second two corporates that I wanted to highlight is, well, one of them is not a corporate exactly, but a free zone, is the Duqm Free Zone, which is one of the largest in the region and is being set up to be an energy and logistics hub to serve the Middle East and also into Asia. The second is Asyad, which is an integrated logistics provider. Now, between these four corporates, there's around $50 billion that's being invested into the energy and logistics spaces in Oman over the next 10 years. And this is a really interesting opportunity. You might think, oh, well, what does infrastructure investments and large-scale private equity have to do with VC? Well, of course, funding all of these developments, or I should say powering all of these developments, is going to be new and interesting technologies. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a case study, and that case study is our work with PDO, Petroleum Development Oman. So a couple of years ago, we met with PDO and we were introduced to their team, and they gave us a few of their key strategic challenges and asked us how could VC fix this. So the first of which was creating an overall venture strategy. How can they get involved? What's their operating model? And how they're going to govern this. Second is how are they going to bring new technologies from around the world and deploy them in their operations? Third was creating a vehicle to commercialize their internal technologies and create spin-offs, spin-outs. And fourth was enabling PDO to work better with other corporates locally and internationally, as well as other startups locally and internationally. And finally, being a big corporate and a very important part of our local economy, they wanted to know how can we ring fence this and how can we make sure that we're not exposing our operations or our finance to undue risk. So this is not actually a unique problem of Petroleum Development Oman or energy corporates or any corporates. Like, corporate venture capital is a growing space, and corporate venture capital in energy is growing even faster. It's kind of growing exponentially, as this graph shows. Basically, all of the major oil and gas and electricity producers have some sort of involvement in the energy corporate venture capital space. These are internal incubators, accelerators, funds, and other initiatives. And there's lots of motivations for them to want to do this. The most obvious of which, obviously, is financial. But other than that, they're really interested to see what deal flow they can get, what new technologies they can acquire. They're also interested to enter new markets and new areas that are outside of their core business, maybe explore new business models for their core business. The other obvious one is maybe to diversify out of their core business, which is a lot of what the energy space is thinking about now, where traditional oil and gas players are investing in renewable technologies. And then finally is to build ecosystems, where maybe they have synergies between their core business and some of the startups that are up and coming. But really, fundamentally, what they're trying to do is disrupt themselves. They're trying to either extend their life cycle or maybe be a part of the disruption that's about to happen to them. And in this case, it's catching up with technologies such as enhanced oil recovery and fracking that's happening in the US, or maybe it's catching up with renewables and electrification of mobility and new distribution methods, new storage methods. And there's lots of different ways that they can pursue this, obviously. They can build these businesses internally, they can partner with people, or they can invest. And we think that that spectrum, needs to be explored in its entirety, depending on whether this is part of their core business or maybe this is part of a new business that they want to look at. So bringing it back to PTO and our work with them, shortly after we signed our agreement to work with them and created our partnership, they established a new department in their structure, which is a first for an engagement like this. And the goal of that department was to evaluate and pursue new business opportunities and enable the commercialization and acceleration of technologies. It sounds pretty high level and out there, but we got to work very quickly with them. First thing we did was decided to create a funnel and see how they can look at the energy space around the world, how they can align that with their corporate objectives, and how they can align that with the country objectives, and then eventually bring that down into evaluating specific opportunities. And these can be everything from commercialization opportunities or pre-seed and seed stage startups that want to pilot technologies with PTO in their operational environments. You might notice one thing that's missing from here is invest. Well, that's where we came in, and obviously the sovereign wealth fund of Oman for ticket sizes that were a bit above our pay grade. We also worked with them to create a screening criteria that they could evaluate all of these different projects in. Because one of the difficult things that they wanted to solve is, well, how can we look at these technologies? And we said, well, maybe look at it like a VC investor would. And this is an oversimplification, but some of the work that we did with them. The next thing that we did was we launched an accelerator program with PTO. But we insisted that it was an external accelerator program, and we brought in one of the largest accelerator groups from Asia to run the program, and we ran the fund. And we invested in the first cohort last year, and this was the demo day where the Undersecretary of Oil and Gas and the head of PTO and my partner, Mohammed, were accepting a little award, I think, there. So looking at that as a case study, let's see what we did with them. We found 6 companies from around the world, everywhere from Calgary to the US, UK, Asia, of course, Oman. And these were screened from 300 applicants, and we brought it down to 6. Each one of those 6 companies had a pilot project with our national oil company, and that could either be to do with technology, oil and gas, renewables, anywhere in the space. I wanted to talk specifically about one of them, Interface Fluidics. So this is a company out of Calgary, and they create microfluidics chips that help companies understand how fluids react and work in physical environments, in this case, in the conditions underground in the reservoir. It sounds super specific and very niche, but actually, this technology can enable an oil field to change its payback period, and each one of these tests that are conducted on these chips can actually speed up the ROI of a field from 3 months to 2 months, which actually translates on the scale of a country's oil production to billions of dollars. So within a very short time, obviously, PTO was very interested in this technology, and currently, Interface has now piloted successfully this testing technology with PTO, Equinor from Norway, and has signed 4 more contracts after that. And they're currently working with a number of other major oil companies. Now, why I wanted to bring this case study up is there's a lot of struggle in the corporate venture capital space bringing in new technologies from startups, even if they're invested in by the corporate and in their portfolio, and actually deploying those in the real world. This whole case study happened within 6 months, from the first day that we met Interface to the successful completion of the pilot project and the further signing of the contracts. And now we're happy to announce that we've followed on funded Interface, and that round is being led right now by Equinor. Another example from the case from our first cohort in the accelerator program. I liked this quote a lot. It was actually from his demo day pitch. And he said, "We believe Oman can be a global showcase for how ecosystem business models can thrive in transportation and oil and gas." And that's exactly what we tried to do with PTO. We tried to make their operations a launching pad for startups. We brought our VC thinking caps and found the best companies in the world, proved those technologies, and then helped them expand to other countries around the world that are within our network. So, kind of to summarize, the world of energy and logistics is experiencing a huge change. The epicenter of that change right now is the Middle East. Oman is uniquely positioned within the Middle East to deploy and experiment with new technologies. There's massive amounts of investments that are happening on the PE and the VC level in this space, and we think it's a really exciting time to be a part of this. And finally, in the case studies that we did, that I presented to you today, we strongly believe that a collaborative environment can achieve things a lot faster. And PTO could have, of course, done this on their own, but partnering with a VC firm and partnering with a sovereign wealth fund actually accelerated this whole process and brought them up to a global level almost instantly. So thanks for listening. I'm happy to talk to anyone. I'm here for one more day, unfortunately, but please be in touch if you're interested in looking for deal flow, sourcing new technologies, advice on corporate strategy, or growth into the Middle East. Thank you.